Hi out there, Louisiana teachers and leaders. We are so excited today to begin session one of our series, Writing and the Science of Reading. How does it align? This series is born out of feedback that we received from the series that we just completed, focused on the science of reading, where so many of you guys reached out to us and you said, we're so excited about the science of reading. We're so excited about doing this work. But what about writing? What does that look like in a science of reading aligned classroom? And we received so much feedback about that we really wanted to provide this series for you to give you guys a clear sense of how writing directly aligns to the principles of the science of reading. And so over this 5-part series, we're really going to walk you guys through what that looks like in the K-3 classroom and how you can support that work. Now, another change that we've made to this series is that instead of having a separate teacher series and a separate leader series, we've merged the series so that we're providing this information for what it looks like in the classroom, but at the same time, we're going to provide you guys as leaders with look-fors for things that you can be doing or looking for in your schools and things that you can do as leaders in your schools to support this work too. So Katasha and I will both be on this series, kind of guiding you guys through this. And we're really excited about that. And hopefully you'll find that this is a very useful series for you, both as a teacher and both for our leaders across the state. So just a quick introduction, kind of move over. My name is Sarah Soman. I am the K-3 Literacy PD Specialist here at the Louisiana Department of Education. If you ever have a question or have feedback on the series or just questions in general, you can always feel free to contact me at sarah.solman@la.gov. Just a little about me. I was a kindergarten and a first grade teacher. I also worked as both an instructional coach and an assistant principal before taking this position at the State Department. And so, I've really kind of seen it from all angles, seen the work of, teaching and leading a school. And I'm just really excited to kind of do this work now to support you guys in whatever role you're serving in now. I'm going to let Ms. Edwards introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I am Katasha Edwards. I am the leader PD specialist here in the Literacy Division at the Department of Education. And just like Sarah, I am a 20+ year educator with many years teaching in a K-2 setting and additional years as an assistant principal. And for the last 7 years prior to moving to the department, school leader, a school building level leader. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to be able to support school and district leaders across the state with effective literacy implementation.
Thank you. Okay, so today's objective is that by the end of this session, participants are going to understand how effective writing instruction in K-3 aligns with the science of reading. So this session is really designed to be an overview and an introduction, but in our future sessions, we are going to dig deeply into each of these components so that you can have a very clear sense of what this looks like in a classroom or in a school. But today we're going to kind of move quickly and talk about it in a very broad way so that you'll have a general sense of where we're going and how this idea of the relationship between writing and the science of reading looks. So we're excited about doing that today. Now, if you're using this, this video in one of your PLCs or your extended plannings, this would be a good time for you guys to stop, or if you're just watching it on your own, this would be a good time for you guys to stop the video. And I want you to think for a second and then discuss what makes a student a good writer. So you can pause right now and then come back, but I want you to think through that. What's in your mind, what makes a student a good writer, especially at that K-3 level? So you can pause right now. Okay. So we're going to kind of jump right into, hopefully you had some great discussions with your team about what makes a student a good writer. But we're going to dig into this question a little bit today throughout all of these, throughout all of our discussion points, so that you can have a very clear sense of what we think a good writer is, and what the research kind of backs up, right? So the first thing I want to talk about today is what is writing and how do we teach it? So put very simply, writing is an opportunity for students to communicate their thoughts and ideas in written form. So, students have ideas, they can often share them, they talk, they share their ideas, but writing takes it beyond just kind of communicating orally, and it pushes students to put those thoughts and ideas in written form. Now, students need explicit instruction in writing beginning in the early elementary grades. Now, we're going to kind of push maybe your thinking on what that would look like in these early elementary grades, but students do need that explicit instruction in writing beginning in these very early grades. So in kindergarten, first grade, we are going to push them to develop their ability to write, but we might not start in the same place that we've started in the past. Now, we also want to emphasize that when embedded in the content of the curriculum, writing instruction is a powerful teaching tool. So, oftentimes, like, our teachers would come to us after the previous series, I'm teaching all of my reading foundations in my curriculum, and then I have a separate writing block, right? Well, what we want to do in this series is we want to kind of push you guys to think about writing as being best done in the context of the curriculum that you're teaching, right? And the instruction that you provide for writing is going to be best done if it's embedded in that content that you're teaching. So we're going to talk through what that looks like in the classroom, but this is a very important thing to keep in mind. Writing is not something separate from the work that you're doing with reading. It's very much integrated with that. And the most powerful writing instruction that you can provide to your students is going to reinforce the work that you're doing, both in reading foundations and in that language comprehension and reading comprehension work that you're doing. So definitely keep that important point in mind as we move through this series. Now, I wanted to bring you guys back to Scarborough's reading rope. And, if you're not familiar with this, with Scarborough's reading rope, then I would definitely encourage you to check out our first series focused on the science of reading. But just as a kind of a review, you can see here with Scarborough's reading rope, it kind of breaks down all of the different components, or they might refer to them as threads, that go into skilled reading. And you can see on the left side of the rope, these threads are very much separated, right? And as we build students' capacities in each of these areas, they weave together much more tightly until they're doing all of these things strategically and automatically, and that makes for a skilled reader. So in the earliest days of kindergarten, the work that we do when it comes to language comprehension is going to be separate from the work that we do with word recognition, right? Because the students are not yet there with their word recognition to be able to read and make sense of what they're reading, right? At the earliest levels, we're building their knowledge of the code, we're building their capacity to read words fluently and with automaticity, such that as they become more fluent and more automatic, they're able to read and comprehend what they're reading. But as most of you K-3 teachers out there will know, that our work is not focused just on building their knowledge of the code. We also focus on those language comprehension strands, right? We focus on building their background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and their literacy knowledge, because we know that what they can understand through read alouds far outpaces what they're able to read on their own in text. So we do both of these things in our early elementary classrooms. We build their capacity to understand what's being read to them, while we also build their ability to recognize words. And this is very important because writing goes hand in hand with this. Now, just like with reading, one of the things that we often see is that, K-3 teachers are very comfortable teaching students how to recognize words, or they're very comfortable teaching students phonics, right? Those reading foundations. But maybe an area that we might need to think and grow in is that language comprehension side, right? We're building that language comprehension separate from that word recognition piece, right? And the same goes for writing, right? On the one hand, when it comes to writing, we're building their capacity to, encode words, which means, think about the words that they want to write, think about the sounds that they hear in the words that they want to write, and then print those words on page, right? It's a lot of things we're asking our students to do, and at the earliest levels, they're not automatic with that work, right? They may be able to communicate orally big ideas or big thoughts about texts that are being read to them. But when we challenge them to put that down on paper, it's much, much harder for them because their skills when it comes to encoding are not automatic. They're not fluid. And so we do want to build their ability to kind of put their thoughts down on paper, but at the same time, we want to build their capacity to respond to what they're learning through read alouds, right? We want to ask them probing questions, and we want to build their capacity to respond orally, because that over time, as these strands merge together, is going to lead to much more sophisticated writing than if all we do is focus on supporting writing based on what they can encode. So that's kind of a mouthful, and we're going to talk through this a little bit today and in later parts of the series. But I want you to think about writing, just like reading, as really at the earliest stages being very separated, like this rope is, right? On the one hand, we're building their capacity to develop ideas that they want to communicate and to kind of zero in on what that would look like if they were to communicate that in writing. But we're also building their ability to encode words that they can put on paper, right? And what they can communicate outpaces what they can put on paper. And so we really have to be mindful of that in these early grade levels, because we don't want to stifle their ideas and their ability to communicate ideas. We want them to develop increasingly sophisticated responses to questions, because as their ability to encode improves, they're going to take that learning and that knowledge such that they become much, much, much stronger writers than they would if all we did was allow them to write based on where they're at with their encoding skills. So definitely keep that in mind as we move through this. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about this, but it's kind of important to recognize that writing is a very complex process. We've talked about how teaching reading is rocket science, referencing Louisa Motz's famous article. If teaching reading is rocket science, then writing is even more complex than that, right? Writing is a very complex process that requires students to manage many factors in that working memory, right? Which is not fully developed for our youngest students, but they have to manage many factors simultaneously: their word choice, their spelling, syntax, background information, and content knowledge. Now for us, we can encode fluently, we can sit at a computer and type words without barely thinking about how they're spelled. But for our youngest learners, they're learning so much and they're not at that point of automaticity that this process of writing, while it seems extremely easy to us and automatic to us, is very, very challenging and requires the management of so much. And there are things that you can do in your classrooms that make this much more impactful and effective in terms of developing student writers. So we have to keep this in mind. If learning to read is hard, learning to write is even harder because you have to be a good reader in order to be a good writer. Now, for students who are not yet at a point of encoding with sufficient automaticity, and I'm talking even if that encoding is inventive spelling is okay, but inventive spelling is hard for our kindergarten and first grade students too. And if they're really not at a point yet of encoding with sufficient automaticity, or for students with very limited oral language skills, work with writing can and really should begin orally. And it should focus on responding to text, either by sharing ideas or responding to questions. So I want, if you're a kindergarten teacher or you're an early first grade teacher, I want you to think of maybe some writing activities that you've done with your students. And I think back to some of the writing activities that I did with some of my kindergarten students, where we might encourage them to go sit at their desk and write. And oftentimes what they produced was not sophisticated thinking, right? Like it might be very basic. It might be, I like my cat because he's fluffy. Okay. Well, they may have that might be a sentence that is easy for them to write. They have the skills that they need to encode that sentence. But that sentence in no way reflects the level of sophistication at which they can think and communicate, right? Because those same students would be sitting on the carpet and after a read aloud about habitats or something like that, would be sharing very sophisticated, detailed information, right? But when they went to print, they might write something like that. I like my cat because he's fluffy. Now, if I could kind of go back to those students and change those practices, what I might have done differently is instead of pushing them to print at that point, I would have been pushing them to think through those thoughts and communicate those thoughts clearly, and then worked with them to dictate those thoughts, right? Because the most important thing we want is for them to have good, strong thoughts that they're communicating in writing, right? But what they can think still is outpacing what they can put on that paper. And so I think that sometimes we tend to rush them to that paper at the expense of developing their ability to think. Okay. And so, again, this part of the series is an overview. We're going to dig into this a lot in later sessions. I'm going to show you guys examples of writing that you can get with these different types of support. But I want you to think about that and remember that we don't need to rush them to the paper, right? The work that you're doing in reading foundations and building their ability to print and match sounds to print is building their capacity to write with automaticity, right? But that alone is not writing. It's an important step for writing, but we also want to be building their ability to develop sophisticated, complex thoughts about texts that we're reading, right? And if I'm a writing teacher at the earliest levels, to me, that is where the most important work that you're going to do is going to happen, right? In terms of developing those ideas that they want to communicate. As you develop their ability to communicate them orally, once they have that automaticity to put it in print, they're going to be able to take those ideas that you've developed with their language comprehension piece and put those to print. Now, as students' ability to encode with automaticity improves through that systematic explicit phonics instruction, they're going to be able to communicate ideas in print. It's going to happen. I promise you, you're not missing the target. You're not missing the boat. But you can't expect them to encode what they haven't learned, right? If they really can't even form letters, then the work that you need to be doing is focused on forming letters, right? Outside of communicating ideas. They need just the work with forming letters or matching speech to print, right? Separate from communicating ideas, because it's too much going on in that working memory, and it's going to be unproductive, and it's going to produce that low level writing, right? So if we're thinking about that writing rote, we're really still at these earliest ages thinking about these pieces as separate, right? Or that reading rote. We're thinking about these pieces as separate. Now, do not rush the process. I know so often we want our students writing, and we want them writing paragraphs, but we want them writing good, meaningful paragraphs. And this becomes increasingly important as they get to second grade, and then really as they get to third grade, right? We want them communicating good, strong ideas, right? We don't want them just kind of starting every sentence with, I like sharks because they have a big fin. I like sharks because they have sharp teeth. I like sharks because they have, gray skin. We want them to be able to think through and communicate ideas clearly. And then as they're writing, as their ability to encode and print kind of merges together, then we want them to be able to do that. Don't rush it, right? If your kindergartners don't pull out those journals until the end of the year, that's okay, right? The most important work that you as a kindergarten teacher can do is helping them match speech to print in your foundational side of it, and also develop their ideas in that language comprehension piece of your writing. Don't feel like, oh, I have to add this on, I have to add this journal writing piece. If they're not ready for it, they're not ready for it. The work that you're doing in both strands is going to come together, and they are going to be able to communicate those ideas in print. But if you force it too soon, you're going to start teaching bad habits that are going to be very difficult to break as they get into second and third grade, where the expectations shift and grow. Now, writing is directly related to reading. An explicit writing instruction in the way that we've been talking about so far today helps students by, one, identifying comprehension gaps, right? So for my earliest students, and I'm kind of asking them questions that mirror maybe some of the prompts that they might see in second and third grade, and forcing them to communicate clearly, that's going to show me, do they understand what I've just read to them, right? Writing also boosts reading comprehension, because if they can communicate about what they've read or what has been read to them, they know they're going to be held accountable in a much deeper way, right? Because they're going to have to think about what the text is saying to them, and they're going to have to communicate based on what they know about the text. It enhances speaking abilities. You'll start to see as students become more proficient writers, they almost start to speak as they write, right? And especially when they're making points or they're making arguments in that language comprehension side of your reading instruction. It improves their organizational and study skills, and it will, over time, for sure, improve those, and it develops their analytical capabilities. So writing is directly aligned to reading. It's not a separate task. It is directly aligned to reading, and it supports reading and enhances their reading. But it's not this separate thing that you do in isolation. You don't have a separate writing block, right? Writing is integrated in all that you do in reading. Now, I want to reference some very key ideas from Louisa Moats, who, as you know, is an expert when it comes to the science of reading. But she has some wonderful insights too about writing, and I think it's very important to keep these in mind. Research does indicate a strong relationship between spelling and writing. Now, kind of reinforcing everything that we've set up to this point, but writers who have to think too hard about how to spell, they're using up valuable cognitive resources that are needed for higher levels aspects of composition. So think about those kindergarten students. They might be able to write, I like my cat, because they've learned those aspects of the code, right? But we might know how long it would take a kindergartner just to draft that sentence. And then they're always going to be like, well, what sound does old, what letter makes the sound old? They're going to ask you all of these questions, right? Because at that level, their focus is on just matching speech to print, right? So all of their cognitive function is going to that task. They don't have anything left to think about the ideas, or very little to think about the ideas, right? Because they're not at that level of automaticity where they can kind of shift their focus to communicating the ideas. Now, even more than reading, and again, like I said, if reading is rocket science, or writing is even beyond that. Writing is a mental juggling act that depends on the automatic deployment of basic skills, such as their handwriting. They have to be able to write legibly, spelling. They have to know at least how to spell something inventively. Grammar, we start with an uppercase, we end with a period. As they get more advanced, where do we put commas? And then that punctuation too, so that the writers can keep track of such concerns as their topic, their organization, their word choice, and their audience needs. Do you think our kindergartners are going to be ready to do that with where they're at in their understanding of the code, or our first grade students? Probably not. So again, we really do need to focus on building these two components of writing separately. Both are very important. Our work with reading foundations and matching speech to print and handwriting, crucial, very important. Building automaticity there is very important, but equally important is building those ideas and forcing our students to kind of communicate these sophisticated ideas clearly, so that as these two merge together and kind of intertwine together, they're able to take these sophisticated ideas that they have, and these thoughts about text that they've grown through your instruction, and match that to print. Now, this will probably resonate with so many of you, but poor spellers may only write what they feel comfortable spelling. Think about that. I mean, if okay, I don't know how to spell any of those words, I'm just going to make a very unsophisticated point, right? Because I don't know how to spell these other things. Think about how limiting that is for them, right? They may also easily lose track of their thoughts as they focus on spelling words with legible handwriting. That's why if you're working with a kindergarten or a first grade student and you ask them what they wrote, oftentimes they forget, right? Because the focus for them has not been on the idea, right? The focus has been on matching speech to print, and that involves so much of their working memory that they really forget the point they're trying to make. They're just like, oh, I know I have to write the word like, and that's going to take me a few minutes. So let me think through what that looks like. But by the time they finish up with like, they forgot what they wanted to say. So keep that in mind as you plan that writing instruction. Now, I am going to turn it over to Ms. Edwards. And, if this feels like a lot, it is, right? And it might push your thinking about how you have approached writing instruction. But don't worry, we're going to go through this in detail. We're going to have examples of student writing in these later sessions. And we're really going to break this down so that you feel empowered to offer great writing instruction in your classes. So I am going to now turn it over to Ms. Edwards, who's going to share what leaders can do to support this work in their school.
Thanks, Sarah. And just to echo what she said, efficient writing instruction, it is a lot. And when we began to roll out the series on the science of reading, one of the initial questions that I began to receive was from school leaders about the writing piece. Many school and district leaders are making the shift to the science of reading. And initially they wanted to know what additional shifts should they make with writing instruction and supporting effective writing instruction. So these are just a few of items that can support leaders in supporting effective writing within their school or district. So one of the first things is to create school-wide or even system-wide visions, shared visions, and shared writing strategies. What we don't want to happen is we don't want students to make it to third grade where they're expected to read and respond to complex texts, and that is their first opportunity to be exposed to that. We want those shared writing strategies, and even Sarah alluded to, even if in kindergarten, even if those shared writing strategies are only done orally, that we're beginning to scaffold and support our students across our school with the same writing vision and the same writing strategies. We want to have schedules that include time to explicitly teach writing embedded in the content of the curriculum. And I know as a school leader, traditionally we have created daily schedules for teachers where there is an identified writing block that is separated from the reading block. We want to make sure that our writing is embedded in the content of the curriculum and that it's aligned to the reading that's being done with students daily. In our PLCs, we want to make sure that our PLCs support the writing process. We want to make sure that when we bring in student work, that we're looking at student writing aligned to the reading that's taking place in the curriculum. We want to make sure that there's a clear understanding of the curriculum used and how writing is or can be embedded. As leaders, we want to make sure that we have opportunities for our teachers to really unpack their curriculum and for them to identify where writing is included. There should be professional development opportunities on writing for all teachers. And I pause here and I put all teachers because all teachers are really writing teachers at this point. We know that our students are expected to write in reading, but they're also expected to write in math, in science, and social studies. And in grades kindergarten through 2, generally our teachers are generalists where they teach all subjects. So we want to make sure that our students use those strategies that are used within the reading block or the reading curriculum, that they transfer those across all content areas. And just really to cultivate a writing culture that views writing as an avenue to support and improve student reading across all content areas. So I know that seems like a lot as well, but as we go throughout this series, we really are going to provide additional recommendations or suggestions to support you as leaders and teachers with this work. This is a series that we're really excited about. And we can't wait to dig in and just to pull back those layers and dig a little bit deeper with each session. So if you have questions or suggestions as we move throughout this series, please reach out to Sarah or myself with questions or suggestions about this series or suggestions about future series and future areas of support that you may need.
Hey, thank you guys so much for joining us. Just to let you know that for this series, we will not be holding live webinar sessions, but instead every Tuesday, we will release a new series. It'll be available through the Literacy Library and also on the LDOE YouTube channel. So definitely check every Tuesday. We know it's hard to kind of find a time that works for all teachers and leaders across our state. We appreciate all of the hard work that you guys are doing and just your commitment to professional growth. We know that you're here because you care about your students and because you want to push their learning beyond anyone's wildest imagination. So we are grateful to you for that. And, we're here for you. You need to call, reach out to either one of us. We are available and happy to be here to support you. So thank you guys, and hopefully we'll see you again in our next series and or in the next episode of this series. So have a great day and see you soon.